and really go through, give you a crash course on getting involved in the NFPA process. Dave has been involved for many years, and as he talked about being on the correlating committee, overseeing 7 other codes, 33 other codes. So he has quite an experience. So I'm just going to turn it over to Dave.
Thank you, Sean. Well, I'm not sure how I feel. I get to be in both the coveted before lunch and after lunch spots. And yesterday, I don't have any fancy quotes. Neil had some good quotes up here. I don't have any fancy quotes. I realized that I needed one, and I did write something down yesterday that Sean DeCrane said when he started the day out. He said, codes and standards are pretty boring stuff. So my self-esteem is rapidly eroding. So I'm going to talk a little bit about codes and standards, or about the NFPA process, and kind of run through it quickly, kind of a down and dirty. Good? Okay. Kind of a down and dirty on how the process works. So the first thing, as we mentioned during the panel discussion, right, is that these things are written in blood, right? All the codes and standards, all the just about everything we have, we've learned from experience, from near misses, like Hunter Clare, and his experience with energy storage systems on the right side. Oh, sorry, wait, I'm pushing the wrong button here. On the right side of the screen, you see the SCBA face piece lens. I believe that was Mark Falkenhand from Baltimore County area. And many other incidents, right, where this is why standards matter. And so we do need to be involved in the process. So the first thing you should know is how do you access the standards? Right, so accessing the standards, you basically have, is it working? There you go. Four ways we can do it. The first thing you probably the easiest thing you can do is go online, nfpa.org / and the standard number you're looking for. So in the case of like energy storage, you might look at 855, and it'll take you to a page called the doc info page, and I'll show you what all these look like. That's free access. You can look at the standard completely online. It's in real time, so whatever changes have happened during the cycle, you'll be able to see. The next way is the National Fire Code Subscription Service. This is kind of historically the way that you could download PDFs. You can't download PDFs anymore, but you can look at a PDF of the document online there. That costs some money to subscribe to that. And then there's NFPA Link, which is the newest way you can access it, and that's a really cool way to do it. And I'll kind of go through that as well. And then obviously old school print edition for sale. You can buy. Tom likes that. You can buy a standard. You have a book mailed to you. Just does not update automatically. We'll get paper that does that, I'm sure, soon, but it's not there yet. So the doc info page. Right, so this is what it looks like. Again, this is nfpa.org / and the number. It's going to take you to a page that looks like this. If you notice there on the bottom, you've got, I think we got a pointer here, yep. If you look here on the bottom, you've got some tabs, the current and prior editions, the next edition, and the technical committee. That'll take you information about the document, what the next edition is, and you can look at it there, and you can look at where it is in the development process, and we'll look at that a little later. And you can even look at who's on the technical committee and who they're representing. This is what that looks like, the free access. So it does look like the book, but it is updated in real time. And then NFPA Link kind of looks like this. And this is an annual subscription. It's pretty cheap. It's $115, access to all the codes and standards, and it gives you your own little, basically, your own little. You log into it. You're going to be able to put the standards you want to look at, and you can have bookmarks. If you see on the right here, I've got some bookmarks of some things, but you can access that. The other nice thing about NFPA Link here is that you can, when you get to it, and this is what the page, if you're looking at something, this is 855, you can highlight, you can cut it, you can paste it. Like I said, you can bookmark it, you can print it. You can't print the whole document at once, but you can print sections. And you can also share them electronically. So it's an easy way to navigate the standards. I'm really enjoying it. Had it about 2 years now. Fire Code Subscription Service, you may be familiar with this, seen this before. Just has a list of the standards. When you look at them, right, basically you can see that. I think I said it was a PDF. It's not. You can see it electronically that way and break down and kind of trying to see what you're looking for. Okay. So when you're looking at a standard, right? I'm not sure why that slide gets messed up a little bit. What are you looking at, right? So what are the actual requirements? How are they built? What do they mean? So first off, the NFPA has this manual of style. It's a very big document that kind of goes in what it should look like. The gist of it is that each of the requirements is one sentence, right? Must contain a shall and only one shall. You can't use vague and ambiguous words, and they even in the manual of style they even have a list of like words you can't use. But you can't use vague and ambiguous words. And if you have explanatory material, right, suggestions or just history or something, it's going to go into Annex A, which is the explanatory annex, and you can have shoulds in there. So if it's not a requirement, if it's a should, it goes into the annex. Basically, here's what the document looks like in there. You'll pick the area you want. One thing that you want to look at in standards, and Neil talked about this in his presentation, was that in every document there's a origin and development of the standard. And if you can see on here, this goes back to the first edition, and it gives you a history, and it goes through each edition what the committee was looking at, what was happening in the fire service, and what changes were made. So the first edition in 1971 was adopted as a standard in 1975, and then it goes through each edition. It's very interesting reading. Something I want you to see here too is we talked about that annex material, explanatory. So if you see a requirement that's got an asterisk next to it, that's telling you that there's annex material. And if you click on that annex material, it's going to pop up and link. You can go to the back of the book if that's the way you're using it, and you'll see what it is. And it's either, again, it's explanatory material. In this case, here's what I'm showing you with has to do with firefighter PPE and reflectivity and roadway incidents, and explains the federal standard that you have to follow for that, but it's not part of the actual standard. Next piece is the process, right? So getting involved in the process, very daunting, very scary for folks generally. Here's what I'll say about it, and clearly I'm somebody who lives and breathes and loves the process, and I think you have to look at it, personally I feel you have to look at it that way, right? You got to live it, you got to love it, and you got to respect it, because it is a process. NFPA does follow it, so it's something if you master, we can be very good at, right? Getting what we want in the process, and you just have to persevere and stay with it. Thankfully, the other thing about the process is that there's still very much a human process. Right? AI hasn't taken this over yet. I hope it never does, but it's very much a human process. So the technical committee is the committee that basically it's a consensus body, right? That's responsible for the development and revision of an NFPA standard. Generally there's about 30 members on a committee. There are some committees that have more than that. No more than 1/3 of the committee can be of the same interest category, and I'll show you what the interest categories are in a second. In order to take some action on an item, they need to have a consensus. That really means a simple majority on the committee to be able to take an action one way or another. NFPA membership is not required to be on a technical committee, so that's good to know. We do recommend you being on do have NFPA membership, because it allows you to participate fully through the process, and we'll explain some of that. But that's what Sean and Neil were talking about, us going to the NFPA annual meeting later on this year in June to speak in regarding some of the NITMAMs or amending motions in the process. And often a technical committee is responsible for multiple standards, right? And the standard is like 1971. It's the actual, the requirements for a specific thing. 855 is the standard. And then a document, historically they were interchangeable standards and documents. So now we have, with the consolidation process, you have new documents that contain multiple standards in them. So now NFPA 1850 is care and maintenance, but it's care and maintenance for two different standards. For 1851, which is your protective ensemble, and 1852, which is your SCBA. So I'm on 4 technical committees. I'm on 2 committees for health and safety. I'm on the Respiratory Protection Equipment Committee. I've been on since like '02. And then I'm on the correlating committee. So between those two committees, there's about, now with the consolidation, I oversee about a dozen documents that has about 35 different standards currently. So it's, and I don't know them all perfectly, but again, I know the process, know how to find the information, and participate in it. And if I can do it, anybody can. These are the interest categories, right? So you have to be able to assign yourself to one of these. Most firefighters are going to fall under either a user. You could be sponsored by labor, and you do need a sponsoring agency. In some cases, you may be an enforcing authority, like in health and safety. If you're a safety officer, you can submit as an enforcing authority. So you'll see firefighters that represent multiple interest categories on a committee. But again, the rule is you can't have more than a third on a single category. So if you're applying to a committee, you probably want to look and see what interest category is underrepresented. And then, okay, so when I got on respiratory, there were quite a few users on there, but there was only one other labor position on there. And so I submitted as a labor spot, and I got moved up, and I had to get sponsored by my local. But I was able to move up ahead of people who had submitted wanted to be on as users. So that's just something to know. And also, again, kind of understanding that there is a wide range of interests on these committees. When we're doing things right, when we're going through it, the NFPA process is a 4-step process. There's public input, public comment, the technical committee meeting, or the tech session, sometimes it's called too, and then the Standards Council takes action. This is approximately a 2-year process, starting with the public input. So the public input opens up pretty soon after a standard is released, and from the public, you're able to go online and put a suggestion of what you want to see added to the standard or change within the standard. That's called the first draft, and development of the first draft. The committee will have a first draft meeting roughly about 2 years before the standard's going to be issued. They're going to consider and provide responses to all public input. They may use the input to develop what's called a first revision, so we don't have to necessarily, it's not an up or down. It could be that, oh, this is an interesting comment, and this is something that's being suggested, but we think it should go this way or that way, and the committee could develop something completely new. And they may also, members of the committee may bring new inputs not submitted as public input. So that's your last chance to get new material into the next edition. The committee gets balloted on their first draft, and then the first draft report, after that passes, the first draft report gets posted for the public to review. And the public has generally, I believe about 6 months, roughly 6 months to a year to provide comment back. In the public comment process, and here's the other thing I want to say about public input, and that is beware, right? Sitting on a committee, one thing that I'm always thinking about is trying to stay away from prescriptive requirements, right? And if you're submitting input or you're looking at the public input and you want to provide a comment on that, you want to think about, is this something that we can do? Does this apply to everybody? So take an issue that can be somewhat controversial, like clean cab or SCBAs out of the cab, right? Not many departments are keeping their SCBAs completely out of the cab, but there are folks who submitted public inputs that say, hey, SCBAs should be out of the cab. So that's a big, broad stroke, and saying, well, for me, I'll look at it and say, well, what problem are we trying to solve? Right? And I think with every public input, you want to say, what problem are you trying to solve? Is there more one way to do it? So we don't want to be restrictive, but we want to solve the problem. So in the case of SCBA out of the cab, right, there's a lot of different arguments. The current argument for it says that, hey, SCBA are contaminated. We don't want to be in contaminated equipment in the cab, right? But what if we just don't say you can't have SCBA in the cab? What if we say you can't have contaminated SCBA? What if you have clean SCBA? What if a department has a way to do either SCBA exchange on the scene, to do proper cleaning and decon, maybe exchange of soft goods on the scene, and do it some other way? Do they have to change out the way they do things? So again, not necessarily, I won't take a position necessarily for or against clean cab. There's a lot of good things, but it means different things to different places, and we should always be looking at, is this too prescriptive? right? Let them solve the problem. Let a department figure out how to solve it. Because how FDNY solves a problem versus how, you know, a small one-station department is going to solve a problem, they're probably going to be very different. In the public comment period, right, comments are accepted as the first draft material. The things that we did accept as first draft material are posted for the final draft, for the first draft report. At the second draft meeting, in that time, the public can make comment on the things that are posted, and they can consider providing a response to all, they have to provide a response to all these public inputs or public comments. And they may make additional revisions to the standard as well that weren't necessarily submitted by the public. The important thing is that at this stage, you cannot have new material, right? New material only happens in first draft. You can't add new requirements. Now, there is a lot of gray area in that. So if the issue has been brought up, right, if you tried to make a change in regarding something, saying about like something in a section, I think I have an example of it here, but you have a list of requirements that you put in, and we added some things, and now somebody says, hey, or nobody adds a new requirement. We can add maybe a new requirement in there, or somebody in the public submits a new requirement to add to that list. That would not be considered new material because it's adding to an existing requirement. The committee votes on that, like in the first draft, they get balloted on it, and then that second draft report gets posted. The public may review the second draft report to decide, you know, whether to submit a notice of intent to make a motion, or for further consideration. So if they don't agree with what we did, right, the committee made a decision, and they're like, I'm still not happy with it, which isn't the case, you know, currently with some of the requirements surrounding PFAS or different tests. Anybody can file a NIPMAM for further consideration, and that's going to go to the annual meeting. That annual meeting is called the tech session, right, where the NIPMAMs that are submitted properly are going to be accepted and are accepted. They're going to come before the floor. These are anybody who's a NFPA member who goes to the annual meeting, can't participate virtually, but you're there. You can participate in the debate, and it's going to get voted basically up or down. That doesn't necessarily mean that change is accepted. It does go back to the committee at that point, and then it'll eventually go back to the technical committee for further consideration as well. The last step is the Standards Council, right? So things that NIPMAMs that were at the tech session, they can be appealed to the Standards Council, really regardless of whether they were passed up or down. They go to the Standards Council. You have to file this appeal within 20 days of the technical session, and then the Standards Council ultimately will decide whether to issue the standard or take other action. So they could push it back to the committee here again, or they could delay the standard, right? Bottom line, and it is the bottom line here, right? I'm sorry, I wasn't even on the right slide. The Standards Council is the overseer and the issuer of all NFPA standards, right? So they're going to make the final decision on the process. And you can, if you appeal to the Standards Council, you can actually go to their meeting and you can speak directly on behalf of something if you feel the need to. Okay. Making inputs and comments. The way you do this is that doc info page that we talked about. That next edition, right down there in the middle, right? You'll click on that from the doc info page, and then if you can slide a different format, but if you scroll down on there, it'll show you your first draft report, and there's a button, a little red button, scrolling down on that. That will show you how you can submit a comment. So. Oop, there you go. You can see it better on this one. So that's what it looks like there. One of those red buttons is going to say submit a public comment. When you hit that, you're going to see, you can see where the first revision says FR there on the little gray box. You can see what was submitted, but also you see that there is like legislative text. So you can see changes that were made. And then you're able to basically assess, well, is that something that I want to see or not? And if you're doing a first revision, if you're going to, or a second revision, a public comment to it, either first or second really, you're going to, it'll open up a screen and you can type directly there. It'll show you legislatively what was added. You just, basically you're going to click on a box and it'll open it up. And in this case, something important to note is that in second revision, you don't actually see the changes, right, that were made in the first revision. So this, I think, is a big shortfall of the system that NFPA has, is that you can look at the first draft and see the changes. If you're looking at second draft, it looks like the final document. So you don't, it's cleaner, but you don't see the legislative text anymore. So you have to review the changes made in the first draft report, and then you go into the public comment and you make changes or comments there of what you want to add. You make changes to it. When you submit it, it's going to show up on in the document info page like that for you to see. This one I didn't submit, but I kind of showed you what it would look like if something's actually submitted. Okay, and then just getting involved, right? Anybody can get involved in this process, and I strongly encourage it. You can get involved at any level, right? You can provide public input, you can provide public comment, you can submit what's called a temporary interim amendment. This requires the support of at least 2 other committee members, but you can say, hey, this is a critical safety issue that we can't wait until the next edition. Right, and so we have done this. We do this very often. Really, it's not unusual in a cycle that once or twice a TIA, an amendment, will be pushed out, gets balloted by the committee, and can change, and that'll change the document before the next edition is released. Join the committee. It's very easy to do that, or at least to submit an application. And you can also attend the meeting as a guest. And I've been on committees for over 20 years. We have a lot of respect for our guests. They come, we respect that they're showing up, they sit in the room. In some cases, if we have the space, we'll even let them sit at the table. And we'll let them participate in the process fully, right? They don't get to vote as a guest. We also have them participating in task groups. So if we have like a working group addressing a specific issue, whether it's like preliminary exposure reduction. If we have a subject matter expert that's not on the committee that wants to participate, or for that matter, run that committee or that task group, we'll put them in charge of it. They can actually run a task group as a guest, not a committee member, and allow them to participate fully in the process. They don't get a vote, right? The only way to get a vote is to be on the committee. Our voice is as loud as we want it to be. I feel, at least in my committees, we've been very successful. If you stand your ground, if you make a coherent argument, if you build consensus, if you're willing to build some bridges, right, and not have to stand completely on one position, but recognize that we got to find a way to make this work, which is often something the firefighters have to do. But if we can, as the fire service, if we can all get on the same page, we seem to be able to do anything. Again, limited exception with the example of the PFAS issue, which I feel strongly we're going to prevail on that coming up soon. Applying to the committee, very simple. Again, the doc info page. You go on that page, on the top portion of that, right there by the document, it'll say apply to the committee. You click on that button, it puts you through an application process. You have to submit a few things. You need a letter of support from a sponsoring agency. But other than that, it's a pretty straightforward process. It takes a little while. It could take a few months because it's got to get first approved through Standards Administration that it's all right. Then it goes to the Standards Council if there's room on the committee. So if they decide that there's room on the committee for that interest group and they want to fill a vacancy, that they'll go to the Standards Council and you get approved pretty quick. But again, it could take you 3-4 months or more sometimes. And that is the gist of it. Any questions? Okay.
Thank you. As you can see, we see Dave Bades in the NFPA process. we give them a hard time about it. But it's an important process, and we are looking for members to sit on NFPA committees. We're allowed a primary and an alternate member. We have probably, with the consolidation, we probably have about 70 committees covered, but that still leaves other committees open. So we're going to get right into this topic. I know it's late. I know we've had a long 2 days, but this is an important topic, as Dwayne's going to talk about. These exterior wall fires in a commercial setting can be extremely challenging to the fire service in a response, as well as to the occupants. So I've talked about importance of the relationships, and we've had that relationship with UL Solutions, with UL Fire Safety Research Institute, and we've done a couple of projects together in the research aspect, but specifically to Department of Energy. When the Department of Energy approached us about this, they really were intrigued by the relationship of UL Solutions and UL FSRI and the research capabilities, the testing capabilities, but also the IFF to represent the fire service and the fire service interest in understanding the need to answer our questions. So without further ado, let me welcome Dwayne the Thunder Sloan.
So I'll just use this one. So can I use this one here? Can you hear me? Okay. I'll turn this one off. Okay. There we go. Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dwayne Sloan, and thank you very much, Sean, for that wonderful introduction. He's the lightning, so I'm the thunder, so that's how that works. And so glad to be here with you today. And as Sean said, we did the DOE work surrounding residential external fires, but we felt it would be really good to lay a foundation with our concern over the exterior fires or external fires relative to commercial buildings first, so that you can kind of get an understanding of that hazard and what we are looking at and what we see with these external fires. With that foundation, then we'll go right into some of the grant work that we did, and then Kelly's going to finish up with the actual work that we did on residential fires as well. So my name's Dwayne Sloan. I've been with UL Solutions for 36 years, actually, and it's been really great to be there. I've had an opportunity to really focus in on fire protection, and in that capacity, I've served on a lot of standards development committees, just like David mentioned, with NFPA and also with ASTM. I'm the voting member for several of our UL standards and engagement standards as well. And so I've had a chance to be a corporate fellow of UL Solutions. That's great. And I'm also on the Standards Council. So just as David mentioned, one of the last steps in those standards in that whole process is actually vetting and voting on TIAs and actually the appeals with the Standards Council. So I'm a part of the NFPA Standards Council. There's 13 of us there. So glad to be here and be a part of these standards processes. If you have any questions about that, please see me on the breaks and what have you. But today we're going to talk about UL Solutions and the fire service, the balanced fire protection approach. We're also going to talk about the challenges in testing for exterior wall assemblies that we see going all over the world, and some of the things that are happening in the reform area, the improvements in this area that have happened since some of these fires that you've heard about, and then also where can you see some of these assemblies in our certifications. Amanda earlier today talked about the certification, so we're going to go back to that and show you how you can actually see some of these products on UL's database. But let me take you all the way back to 1894, where UL first got started. We actually got started with a very close attachment to the fire service. When William Henry Merrill was actually asked to investigate this rash of fires at the Columbian Exposition and to see why these fires were even happening, that's where we got our start. And with literally a few $100s, he actually was up over the fire station in Chicago. And I'm going to say it, Flam. So Sean DeCrane wants me to put Flam's picture in the wall here to simulate that he was there in 1894, but I said I would never do that to you, Flam, okay? But yeah, so we were there in 1894. That's where you all got our start, and so it's great to be back here with the fire service. Our original logo was this logo right here. It was a fireman's belt. That was before the UL in a circle that you know and see today. It's these Latin words, ignis servis non dominos. That's my best Latin that I've got here. But it means fire is the servant and never should be the master. So that was our original motto and our logo. It changed over time and it became the UL with a circle around it. But it just kind of goes to show how our attachment was with the fire service. You've also heard a lot about the three organizations. Adam Barroway was here, and he showed a lot of the different things that they were doing on research. And then you've also heard us talk about UL standards. Okay, so I wanted to just take a moment to share that we are three distinct organizations, okay, but with three very distinct purposes within the organization, but we have one shared mission. We're all still one UL. But when you hear us talk about the Fire Safety Research Institute with Adam Barroway, they focus in on the science and the data that's going to inform us on all of our challenges. When they do work, it is not for profit, and they're always going to publish it. Regardless of what those results show, the FSRI group or any of the groups with the UL Research Institutes, they're going to publish that work and make it available to you. So that's a part of our not-for-profit. Also, a part of our not-for-profit is UL Standards and Engagement. UL Standards and Engagement are the ones that are the administrator. They are the standards developing organization arm of UL, and they also engage with our stakeholders, and they're separate and distinct, and they also are a part of the not-for-profit entity. UL Solutions is the ones that works with our customers to get the products in and to investigate them to the different standards, whether it's UL standards, NFPA standards, like the PPE gear and products, or ASTM standards, what have you. Whatever standards there are, we actually use those standards in order to investigate the products and give them the UL certification. Call them listed, and they actually get the mark. So we're the ones actually working with the customers and doing that work, and we are a part of the for-profit part of the UL enterprise. So that's the three organizations. We all still work very, very closely together. We all have the same common mission of working for a safer world, but I wanted to take that opportunity to kind of share very clearly the distinction between the three organizations. But we're here, the objectives here is to, of course, protect life and protect property, make safe and secure and sustainable living, but I want to focus in on safe and secure and sustainable living because this is actually a little bit of a challenge for us. We have a lot of things that are happening, and because the products actually have to comply with sustainability and types of other requirements like that, then it does present a little bit of a challenge for us that you'll see, and that really does present itself on the exterior walls. When we talk about the systems, just like David mentioned, the installation codes, we call them model codes, like the IBC, International Building Code, International Fire Code, like NFPA 5000. Those codes are the model codes that get picked up by the jurisdictions. But within them, they have the product standards and certifications, like the UL standards and the NFPA standards. They're all within those model codes. So it's really important for us to focus in on this part and get that right, because they actually get put into the installation codes. And then, of course, that's they're used for inspection and enforcement, and that's how we get to the safe products in buildings. So it all kind of works in and ties in together. But when we talk about high-rise fires, one of the things that we see is the stats for NFPA high-rise fires is still quite high. U.S. fire departments respond to an average of 14,500 structural fires per year in high-rise buildings. We still have a fairly, of course, any deaths are too high, but we still have 40 civilian deaths and 520 injuries associated with that, and a lot of property loss. So these stats I just wanted to kind of show that to set the stage for why we still want to take a look at high-rise fires. And these are the NFPA statistics relative to the high-rise fires as well. Okay. So we always love to look at our comprehensive fire protection approach. It's been touched on a couple of times yesterday and today, that we would love to educate and prevent the fires from ever happening in the first place. As Sean says, a good day at the office is one where you never have to put the gear on and go out at all. And I joke with some of my friends that about 85% of the company at UL Solutions, we work with our customers to try to keep that fire from ever happening in the first place. They're working on the different products that you have in your homes so that it's not a source of a fire to begin with. All right. But we kind of know that fires do happen. You can't keep that from happening. And so when fires happen, then it actually starts from ignition, and you've got the content flammability and interior finish. We call that area reaction to fire. We want to keep the fire from spreading across the surface so fast that it can't be under control. All right, so that's kind of like the first step in our fire protection world. When we're in the lab testing, we want to understand that flammability aspect and how fast the fire goes across the surface of things. And that's where we're going to get into some of this exterior wall discussion. We also want to detect an alarm so that we can make sure that we let someone know that the fire is going on and get them to safety and out of harm's way. We have active suppression, where something has to happen, activate, in order to put the fire out or extinguish the fire or suppress the fire. And so that's our suppression area of business and active suppression. But that has to be balanced also with what we call passive protection. That's where you get your hourly rated walls and hourly rated horizontal assemblies, and floor and wall assemblies, and also your fire stopping, what have you. All of that is for the purpose of serving a passive purpose, so that the room can sit there, and actually you can have an area where you're compartmentalizing the fire. So you actually want to keep that fire in the room of origin. And so that's the other section that is passive. And then, of course, we have our fire service, where you guys come out and actually are dealing with this. Hopefully, if all of these things have worked well, then your job becomes much easier. So we actually wanted to show you the comprehensive fire protection approach in the products that we test and list. So with respect to exterior wall assembly, some of the challenges are, here's a lot of the different products that we see on the exterior of walls. Okay, we've got foam plastics, we got batten blanket products, continuous insulation, we have metal composite panels like the aluminum composite panels, EFIS systems, the exterior insulation finish systems. You know, all these different things actually comprise the exterior wall, but one thing that they have in common is that most of these materials are combustible materials. Okay, and with that, you think about the area that we're in, where we want to have speed to construction, and we want to introduce new materials into the marketplace. So with this idea of introducing new products into the marketplace, there's this compounding effect of all of the various combinations that you can have for exterior wall construction. So for instance, if you've got 2 types of gypsum board, you've got 3 types of insulation and 2 different types of weather barriers and a couple of different aluminum composite materials, you could have 24 different assemblies that would have to get tested as a combination. Because when we do this test, it's important to see that you test this as a combination, as an exterior wall full assembly. You don't just test one part of this. You don't just test the gypsum board, or you don't just test the ACM by itself. You have to test it as a combination, as an assembly. All right. Think about how many of the codes that we just talked about, they're trying to increase the thermal resistivity of your walls in buildings. And in order to do that, a lot of times they call for higher R values. Well, with that higher R value, you have different uses and increased uses of thicknesses of insulation materials. So when that happens, a lot of times you're adding more combustibility to that wall design. So what we find is that there's a delicate balance between striking the balance between the functionality of the building envelope performance, you know, having it be resistant to UV, no water penetration, no air penetration, and what have you, sustainable construction, and then balancing that with fire safety. So over on this side, there's a lot of things that are happening in the code arena in order to strengthen building envelope performance and functionality performance, and also sustainable construction. But sometimes that conversation is getting lost with the balance of the fire protection or the fire safety that is also in the codes. So these manufacturers have to balance those 2 different things. An example of the building envelope performance considerations, things such as thermal performance, air leakage, water vapor permeability, resistance to water penetration. Who wants to be in a building that actually has water penetrating through? UV resistance, sound transmission, and wind load resistance. These are all of the characteristics that a manufacturer of these products has to kind of struggle with in order to meet these requirements in addition to the fire requirements. We do testing. We actually acquired a company called Kleb up in Canada. And it's been really interesting to work with them because they actually have this huge jet engine that they actually turn on and actually spray water and wind against an assembly. We do what we call performance mock-up. And we mock up a building, and we're able to look at the moisture accumulation and things that would lead to sick buildings like mold. We control the air leakage and look at energy conservation in that whole bit of our business to make sure that water and air is not getting where it doesn't need to get. And so, yeah, they spend quite a bit of time, money, and energy and resources trying to manage their thermal, their air leakage, and their water infiltration. Again, that has to be balanced with the fire protection. We see things such as sustainable design, retrofit designs, which we're going to be talking about more today. We see things such as building applied photovoltaics. I had many calls about what happens if I put a solar panel on the side of a building. Well, if you put a solar panel on the side of a building, that's something that can burn as well, and so we want to investigate that. Once again, we talked about U factors and R values, increased insulation thickness, green facades with natural foliage. We see that of course is going to burn, and many of the decarbonization efforts that are happening in buildings. There's a couple of shots here of things that we've seen where foliage is on the outside of buildings, presenting quite a challenge for these facades. So what's the problem? The problem is that if you have a fire on the outside of these types of buildings, then the traditional things that we know to work in the fire protection circle, that comprehensive fire protection approach, they don't work on the outside of buildings. That's a problem. So if you've got sprinkler systems, they're not going to work. They're on the inside of the building. That's not going to help a fire from spreading on the outside of the building here. If you've got compartmentalization, where you have really good hourly resistive rated floors and ceilings and walls and what have you, and great fire stopping, that only works to keep the fire from moving into the building, but it doesn't help the fire from spreading up the building. So you have situations like the Mermoz Tower over in France. There's a perfect example of what we call leapfrogging, where the fire begins at the bottom floor and it just kind of leapfrogs up the panels. It breaks in one window and goes back out and burns whatever is combustible on the outside, goes into another window and then bursts outside, and it kind of gives you a straight stream to burn all the way up the building. And we've seen this in many, many situations because the traditional fire protection approaches that are in the codes basically don't deal with these types of situations. So here's just a few of them that I have on the screen here. At Grozny Towers, we've got the one at the Address Hotel over in Dubai. This was right across the street from, right across the way from the Burj Khalifa, and it happened December of 2015 when everyone was there watching fireworks at the Burj Khalifa. You could actually see the building burning right behind. The Torch Tower over in Dubai burned on February of 2015. And while they were doing the retrofitting on the burn from 2015, it burned on the other side on August of 2017, and it's called the Torch Tower. So that's kind of ironic there, but yeah, that actually burned 2 times over in Dubai. And then, of course, you got the Grenfell Tower, which happened over in June of 2017. Many of you have heard about that because that was a loss of life with 72 people there. And it got a lot of attention to these exterior wall fires and these types of scenarios. But it didn't just stop after 2017 with Grenfell. We have other situations that continued to happen even after 2017. There's a couple of them that have happened since 2017. And then just as recent as we gave this same type of program in Raleigh, we just had heard of one in Valencia, Spain, where basically no one lost their life here, but my understanding is that it happened in February 22nd, and this one did deal with a situation where the fire leapt from one location to another location. All right. So let's take a look at that Address Fire Hotel that was over in Dubai and ask ourselves the question, what about that aluminum composite material, that combustible material that was on the outside of that building? Was it rated or not rated? I want to keep that in your head, and we'll come back to that question. But I want to just kind of show what that kind of looks like. Here's some footage of the Address Hotel fire that happened over in Dubai. It started with an external light at this floor here. My understanding is that it was more of an electrical fire that actually began it right there. By the time people noticed it and the fire service were being called out, you kind of see it beginning to propagate up the side of the wall. And within a matter of minutes, it was already making its way all the way up the tower. My understanding is that the fire went from that floor all the way to the top of the building in less than 20 to 25 minutes. And this was out of commission for several years. They had to cover it up because it was an eyesore there right in the heart of Dubai. Luckily, again, no one lost their life in this particular incident, but many people were displaced, and it was millions of dollars of damage. So these fires happen by a lot of different, what we call insults. The beginnings of them are random. You can't call it. There's barbecue grill fires. Some of these have happened because of trash can fires. Welding activities happened over at the Monte Carlo Casino fire that was over in Las Vegas. Fireworks, cigarette butt disposals, and also other electrical fires and arson. So all of these have been reasons for these exterior fires that have happened. And if you look at the unique burning behavior of this, that's also another reason that it's so hard to get under control. Of course, you've got the vertical nature of it. Something that burns vertically is going to be different than something that burns horizontally. You also have all of the different walls with combustible materials, as I mentioned, all of the different things that are getting used. Usually involves windows, like the leapfrogging, bursting through the windows. Passive protection is very limited in what it can do to stop this. Active protection, sprinklers is limited. We even have had situations where they've tried to put sprinklers on the outside of the building, and you can imagine that's you're going to use up all of your water supply. Okay, so that really has not ever worked. And then in some of these situations, you've got wind that contributed to being very difficult for the first responders to fight these fires. So let me just pivot into the test that we do in order to deal with this type of occurrence. It's called NFPA 285. As David was saying, it's one of the many NFPA standards. I'm on the fire test committee for NFPA 285. We're now on the 2023 version of this standard. We recently went into the standard and put an annex in there in order to help us with engineering judgments and the judgments that can be made on the testing associated with this. We call it a multi-story intermediate test apparatus. It's a two-story apparatus. You can see there's got a burner on the first floor, and we ignite that burner, and it actually ignites and impinges on the inside of the wall assembly. We build the whole wall assembly in a frame and roll that wall assembly up to this two-story furnace chamber. And then at 5 minutes into the test, we roll up a window burner. You can see the window burner here, and we ignite that at 5 minutes into the 30-minute test. And you can see here, let's say once the wall is put there, this is a masonry wall that we're testing with all of its combustible materials behind it. You can kind of see here that we don't want to go up the wall by 10 feet and not over by 5 feet from the center line of the burner. So you got 10 feet up the wall and 5 feet going either way on the center line of the burner. And that's the pass-fail criteria. So let's take a look at a test. We were able to work with a customer to bring in a assembly where the only change was the aluminum composite material and how it was constructed, whether that aluminum composite material was made with polyethylene in it or whether it had a limited combustible core. The inside of the wall was gypsum board. We had basically non-combustible continuous sheathing. We did have a weather-resistive barrier in this one. And airspace, and then again, the only real combustible component here was the ACM, the aluminum composite panel. Usually we don't get to see this because, of course, manufacturers don't want to pay for tests that actually fail, right? So we were able to work with the manufacturer. We expected that this would be a failure. So at 5 minutes, we rolled up the window burner. You can see us igniting that window burner at 5 minutes, and you can see the ACM, the aluminum composite material, beginning to melt. All right, at 6 minutes or so. Like I said, we had mineral wool on this one and gypsum board and just a very small weather barrier and an airspace. So nothing else really to burn but the ACM. At about 9 minutes into the test, we started seeing things dripping from the ACM. We saw that the ACM outer skin was beginning to open up, and it basically right at about about 14 minutes into the test, we had already well exceeded the 10 feet requirement, and we were at the point where we had to put this thing out. So literally halfway into a 30-minute test duration, we showed that NFPA 285 demonstrated that that ACM panel was going to open up and reveal that internal core, which was a polyethylene core. And after that, it went all the way to the top. We had to kind of come in and put water in it right at about halfway through that test. So it definitely demonstrates that NFPA 285 was able to distinguish that performance and reveal that this would be a bad actor if you actually had that on the exterior of a high-rise building. Okay. Typically, when we're doing this type of test, we come back in and we look at everything after the test is over with. That one was a clear failure, no question about it. So what we did is we came back in and we wanted to do the exact same test, only difference being that that ACM, aluminum composite material, now has a limited combustible core. Some of them have mineral wool in them. This one actually had a proprietary limited combustible core, but the customer was very, very confident that this would actually work out to be a pass. So once again, we do our test. We get this cranked up. At 5 minutes into the test, we're going to roll the burner up. And you see us igniting the burner. We saw the same warping of the outer skin, as you can imagine, because that outer skin is the same, but this time when the outer skin warps and begins to open up the seams and reveal that limited combustible core, it's a little bit different than the first time. Once we opened up the core, we didn't see the propagation of flames. Here we are at 20-something minutes into the test. It's starting to work its way up the wall, but it didn't actually exceed the 10-foot level. So here you go, 30 minutes into the test, this is what we would see as a passing test. Yes, it did open up. It has that triangular shaped flame, flame pattern, but it didn't go to the 10-foot level. We'll share some important things about this particular test. We actually did this test twice. The first time we did this test, the one that was supposed to pass actually failed. I called Sean up, I was like, oh my gosh, what's happening here? And it was a workmanship issue. So they actually put this together, but even in a laboratory type of a condition, realizing that we were going to do it for this purpose, the workmanship problem that they have actually caused this to fail the first time, and they came back and did it, quote unquote, right. They came back and did it right. But it just goes to show that even in a laboratory condition, just something as simple as making a mistake in workmanship actually made the difference between a pass or a fail on this test. So this test, you can actually see it on the IAFF site as well as on YouTube. You can actually take a look at the whole deal. It actually shows it in greater detail. Certainly invites you guys to take a look, and you can just plug in NFPA 285 on YouTube, and you'll see us there, myself and Sean, going through this work that IAFF was able to sponsor for us. And this also shows a little bit of a challenge. It kind of shows all the variety of test standards all around the globe. I just don't want you to think it's just about NFPA 285. That's the test that we use here in the US. But imagine if you have these products that are going over to the UK, internationally, Australia, Japan, France. I've got information that shows how all of these test methods are somewhat different, have different parameters and different setups and what have you. And so unfortunately, you can't take one test and say that it actually will represent these other tests all around the globe. So you actually would have to do a different test if you're actually taking your assemblies to different areas around the globe. That's another challenge that we have in this area. We try our best to understand the scale of tests. You saw earlier where in PPE we do a lot of things that are benchtop tests. It's the same here. We do benchtop style tests that are material level tests, individual component tests like taking it to the Steiner tunnel and understanding the flame spread and smoke associated with it. Intermediate scale tests like the NFPA 285 test, and we've even done things such as big full-scale mock-ups. We went to a place called Gandhinagar, India, where we have this 3-story location that we can burn over and over and over again to make sure that the scale of testing is right, that products that actually have passed 285 would actually still do well in a full-scale mock-up. We put furniture in there just like if it's a real building and start a fire and just watch how that product, the fire propagates within a full-scale scenario. So let's go back to our question. For the Dubai fire at the address, I asked the question, well, do we think that that ACM panel was rated or not? Okay, how many people in the room think that maybe that ACM panel had a rating on it? By a show of hands. Nope, maybe? George, maybe? How many people think that it wasn't rated, that it did not have a fire rating? Got a couple hands, okay. So the answer is that that panel actually had a fire rating. Okay, the ACM product had a fire rating, and here's what it had. It had an ASTM E119 fire rating, and this has everything to do with your hourly resistive rated walls. So imagine putting some gypsum board, like 2 layers of gypsum board and some other things together, and putting ACM panels on the outside. Well, this is an interior wall. Basically, this subjects the product from the interior side, and as long as you don't exceed a temperature requirement on the other side, you can pass. All right. So the ACM had been used in a compliant fire resistive wall assembly. It got like a 1 hour or 2 hour rating, but unfortunately that was not the right test to do. This NFPA 285 test that basically subjects the wall to an exterior flame and watch the flame go up the outside, that was the proper test. So it goes to show you that a product can have a fire rating, but it needs to be the right fire rating. So this product actually did have a fire rating, but it was just not necessarily in the right test. Other tests that kind of get confused, we have a single burning item test that gets used over in Europe, ASTM E84 UL 723 with the Steiner tunnel. Sometimes gets confused with a fire test because you do get a fire rating out of that. There's something called a room corner test that sometimes gets a fire rating. But again, just want to kind of drive the point home that you have to have the right test in order to do that. George. Right, yeah, so that would be like a whole half-hour discussion, but George, yeah, George is asking, is the UK test more restrictive or more severe than the NFPA 285 test based upon the fire source? And the answer is that one way to look at it is that yes, the actual fire source itself has a higher energy. Okay, but there's some other details in that test that are less severe than NFPA 285, so it's a little bit of a balance. You can't necessarily just look at the fire source because, let's say, for instance, on this particular test, you're not exposing the interior. You're actually building on top of an assembly, and then the fire just comes out of a hole. And so we've actually gone into a deeper dive on a lot of these to show that while even the fire source might be different, there's parts of NFPA 285 with how you instrument it that actually make it more severe as well. Yeah. Yeah, so my understanding is that the Grenfell situation, that it should have been tested to this standard, and that's what the Grenfell inquiry was all about, was doing a deep dive to determine whether those products that actually got installed on the building, whether they were or were not actually tested per the reports. And that all of that information is in the Grenfell inquiry. Yeah, very good. Good question. Thank you for that. So there's many efforts for reform and improvement. Good question from George. That basically after Grenfell, we came in and we had the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Report, and out of that came things such as making sure that they focused on high-rise buildings, during design, construction, and refurbishment, some guidance on things that had to happen, making sure that the residents have a voice in what they see. There were changes in the regs on competencies, labeling, and a thread of truth, making sure that the product that gets tested actually gets installed on the building as well. I wouldn't want to finish this up unless I talked about the fire blocking in New York City. New York City has some newer rules that says that even though you might have an NFPA 285 compliant design, then they want to see fire blocking at certain intervals. And so that actually has already gone into play. The whole idea is to deter this leapfrogging that we saw earlier. And so even if you have an NFPA 285 compliant design, NYC has now gone in and made regulations and laws to say that you actually have to have fire blocking installed. So how do I know whether or not something has been evaluated to one of these standards, especially like NFPA 285? Well, we use our third-party certification. Rather than just do the test and give that sponsor a report, and then they have a report and they have to show it around to people, we actually constructed a certification program that allows you to actually see these assemblies as they're all put together. It's on something called Product IQ, and that goes for PPE gear, anything that would actually have a listing mark on it. You will find it on UL Product IQ. It's accessible all the time. You just go in there, put your name in there, it will remember you, and for anybody in this room, you actually will be able to get the enhanced versions of Product IQ because of your role as a first responder. So just pop in there, and you can actually put a keyword into the field right here in the search field. And if you put in NFPA 285 or what have you, then it's going to pull up our categories for exterior wall systems and exterior wall system components. And architects, first responders, code officials, they love this because they can go in here and they can plug in their wall designs and they can see how all of the assembly goes together. All of the numbers you see here with circles around them, it shows the individual component, its role in the assembly, and how this whole thing goes together. So for instance, you'll be able to see the internal gypsum board, you'll be able to see the steel studs, the continuous insulation, if there's insulation in this, if there's a WRB, a weather-resistant barrier, all the way out to the outside cladding. And you'll be able to see how all of that goes together in order to create what was a compliant NFPA 285 design, okay? So that's all I've got for you. And so from this, with this foundation, it's going to kind of make a little bit more sense as to why we went into the DOE work on residential exterior walls, because we were seeing this same type of thing happen, but on a residential basis. And that's why DOE worked with us for this part of the grant. So with that, I'm all done. And I think we'll reserve the questions for our panel discussion, right? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, buddy.
All right, rapid fire here. So I'm guessing at what slides are up there because I was just kind of looking at it. I haven't looked at it really since the last time we presented. So as you saw, Dwayne has an extensive knowledge on the commercial testing and the residential testing, as we'll see. And it's great to have that wealth of information. And we were able to put that video together on NFPA 285 and what our members should be looking at. And so, as I mentioned, this was a project that came to us from the Department of Energy, but we have some background to it. And where the Department of Energy program was really focused was on residential walls, so you don't need to know enough about me. So really what I'm going to cover real quickly here is the exterior wall challenges for the fire service, especially in the residential aspect of it. We don't think of it, but when I look around here in Boston and all the triple deckers and how close we are together here in Boston, if you start thinking about people putting the combustible siding or retrofitting that to meet energy performance desires, and you're putting that, basically that rigid petroleum-based product on the outside of that exterior wall, we have seen that fire propagation. I'll cover a little work we did with UL FSRI, looking at the exterior walls and also the attic fires. So what is today's fire environment? If it's okay, I'm going to walk a little bit. So this is something we've talked about for a while with FSRI. If you look at the statistics, we're seeing larger homes that are being built with the National Association of Home Builders. Within those homes, we see wide open spaces, especially on that first floor. I know my home was built in 1997, and there's not a solid wall on that first floor. Is this a challenge for you, Marty? Sorry. I got to keep him awake. But I know I need to lose weight. Aaron, are you saying? Okay. So there's not a solid wall on that first floor. It's wide open, right, for that social aspect. We want people to be able to engage each other. But what that does is it creates openings. It creates that open air, that access to the oxygen in the air. We lose that natural compartmentation we had in our residential homes. We see the void spaces, especially with truss construction. We, instead of having that inherent fire barrier above the ceiling area with the 2x12s or the 2x10s, now we have that wide open air. The fire can propagate across the floor. And then we see, as I just mentioned, the truss construction. We see the changing materials, the designed I-joists. We're seeing plastic components come to the marketplace. And I referenced it earlier, changing the residential code to require engineered floor systems to be protected with half-inch gypsum board. We were successful in doing that in 2012. But it took the life of Arnie Wolf to get us there from Green Bay, Wisconsin, and the research from UL and FSRI. And then the increased fuel loads. So when you look at that picture there, that's actually out of a National Geographic in 1997. What they did is they asked a family to bring all of the plastics out of their home and put it in the front yard. A sales rep from step 2 will be driving by looking at market share, right? We're looking at the fuel load. That's all petroleum-based products. And if you think about the synthetics of today's couches, the chairs, the furniture, we're just seeing that petroleum enter into the marketplace. And what impact does that have on our occupants? Well, back in the 1980s, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, their predecessor, did a study it's called the Dune study, looking at the performance, or this goes back to the 70s, looking at the performance of smoke alarms and the time to escape. And what they had calculated at that time is that when the smoke alarm activated, the occupant had approximately 17 minutes to effect egress before conditions became untenable. In the 2000s, NIST went and replicated that study. The only thing they changed in that study was the furniture. And that 17 minutes for egress time is now approximately 3 minutes. And a lot of that depends on ventilation and the amount of air that's available. And we look at the comparisons here. You may have seen this previously. Oh, I thought this went up to full screen. It does not. But on the left, you see that natural room. That is your solid wood framing. That is your natural fibers. That is your natural fabric that is covering the furniture. In fact, when this furniture started to wear down, what did Grandma do? Went and got it reupholstered, right? But it didn't wear down because she usually had that plastic covering over it, but we didn't cover it here. So on the right, we have a more modern furniture. It's a synthetic-based furniture. Polyurethane foam, pressboard construction on the framing, and the synthetic coverings. This also has flame retardants in it, right? Because we bought it off the shelf. So you see the difference. At first, you had kind of an open flame on that natural fiber, but that was because it was fully consuming that fiber as it's going. But once that fire gets going on the right, it's hard to see there. But what's the main production, or I said, what's the main byproduct that it's producing? Smoke, thick black smoke, because it's not perfect combustion, right? Incomplete combustion creates carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide. Now we see that it's preheating, and now we transition to flashover. In 4.5, depending on the opening of that room right there, we can see flashover from 4 minutes to 5 minutes to later, depending on controlling the airflow. On that left, that natural fiber room, sometimes again depending on that ventilation opening, if it's wider, it may not flash at all because all of the heat is able to dissipate. And if you think about the construction of that typical residential occupancy now, on that first floor, wide open, unprotected stairs to the second floor. That means if an occupant has any delay in responding to that smoke alarm, if that occupant is not out of the house, then when our members arrive, it now becomes a life safety, it becomes a rescue. So it puts our members at greater risk as well. So this is a firefighter safety issue as well as an occupant safety issue. And we've seen some modifications that really enhance what we were trying to do from a fire service perspective. You look at UL 217 and 268, that's the smoke alarm and smoke detector standards. We're incorporating through the NFPA 72 standard the requirement to reduce cooking nuisance alarms, right? Identify good cooking versus, or I should say wanted cooking versus unwanted cooking. So really a lot of research went into that. And also we've seen the introduction to the emergency communication systems, and we got this into the codes. Bob was very instrumental in that after 9/11. With the failures of our communication systems there, I still think it's one of the most important advances. The code now requires that our communication systems work effectively in 97% of that structure. And now we have the code requirements to go in there and require the building owners to update their system. Joe Brooks here from Boston has used that very, very effectively in the Boston area to ensure that communications are operational, especially in high-rise buildings. but it's also the importance of standards, right, and test standards. And Dwayne covered the NFPA 285, looking at preventing the fire propagation from an interior fire reaching that exterior wall and then propagating up the side of the structure. So Dwayne kind of went over what those AC panels are. Really, I just wanted to give a sample of it here. You kind of look at it there. The important thing is that sometimes people are lulled into a false sense of security. They see those two panels of metal and they go, this is non-combustible. This isn't going to catch fire. The fire is not going to propagate. But what's the problem with that theory? They're not counting on the penetration or the failure of that seal around that panel. And if that panel is containing a combustible plastic, as it starts to melt, as it starts to come out of between those two panels, it becomes a fuel load. And it becomes a very effective fuel load at communicating upside of the structure. And so industry, and we find this a lot, industry has their focus, and I'm not trying to make them a bad guy, but they have their focus, they have their desires to bring aesthetics to it. We have designers out there, architects that are designing beautiful structures. Now industry wants to meet the challenges of meeting that aesthetic look. They want to be economical, so they win the bid. They want to be low maintenance, especially if you're a high-rise building. How many times do you want to put a crew on the outside repairing it or cleaning it? They want the diversity of choice. We don't want every building to look the same, right? We need individuality. We need sustainability. We want to meet the energy performances, climate control, cooling in the summer, heating in the winter, and versatility, and also the important retrofit, just like Grenfell was, just like a number of buildings have been. What's the one component that they're not thinking about here? Fire. Right? And we see this in the residential, and Kelly's going to get into the testing that we did in the residential looking at this, because this is what DOE did not do. They were looking at the energy performance, but they were not looking at the fire risk. And so if you look at a regular ACM panel, that it may have a polyiso foam or a polyurethane foam, the risk of fire propagation is increased exponentially versus, I know it says fire retardant, but it doesn't have to include fire retardants. It can be a non-combustible interior of that panel, but really what it's there to do is designed to limit the spread or the spread of fire. So since we're talking about combustible exteriors, let me go there. Tall timber buildings. So this is an issue that we were addressing. I was put on an ad hoc committee through the International Code Council. The American Wood Council had introduced code change proposals trying to increase the permittable height and area of a type 4 structure, heavy timber. They wanted to go from 6 stories to 9 stories. We're at the late stages of the code change development process when the fire service, was like, hey, wait a minute, what are you trying to accomplish? And their sole argument is, we're going to reduce the impact of wildfires by putting up taller wood structures. But they had no justification, they had no data to demonstrate that they could do this effectively or safely. So they established a Hadcock committee. Long story short, we got together, did some fire testing. A lot of people were trying to push for 40 stories. The fire service, because of our involvement, we are now limited to 18 stories, but this isn't necessarily accurate because the book wasn't even printed, and Milwaukee already has built a 26-story wood structure. So that's a whole different presentation. But Grenfell happened during our deliberations, and one of the most important aspects that came out of that was that as the committee went forward, we put forward changes that would not permit any combustible materials on the exterior facade above 40 feet in a mass timber structure. So are wall fires a concern? And if we just look at the NFPA statistics are driven, or I should say extracted from the U.S. Fire Administration. So how many do NFIRS reports? Yeah, they do have final destination. They go to the U.S. Fire Administration, and folks like NFPA, other consultants, USFA uses them. They extract that information to develop these reports. And NFPA published a report looking at 2005 to 2015, and annual averages were over 7,600 fires on the exterior of a residential structure with 50 casualties and over 350 or 340 injuries. When we look at, these are annual averages. We have 10,000 attic fires. Now, attic fires can be kind of fun if you're on the tip. They can kick your ass, but they're kind of fun, right? So we know that, but they have a devastating impact on our communities. And this is just some of the statistics. But these fires do happen. And I can tell you, we've been in discussions in the code world where industry will tell us, no, that's not happening. And how can they say that? Well, they're basing it on statistics that they're looking at, because we don't do a good enough job, I think, in reporting our own data. It's critically important that we report our own data. But if you look at vinyl siding isn't even a drop-down category in the NFPA report. Plastic is. So you have to be cognizant of that when you're filling that out. But how do these fires start and spread? Well, this is Avon Lake, Ohio. This is about 10 miles outside of Cleveland. It's a career department, although they're not hugely staffed. It's a well-funded department. They got the call for a fire in an apartment, and this is what they found on arrival. And they were right up the street. It was a windy day. The occupant had discarded a smoking cigarette into a flower pot, and it ignited the contents of the flower pot, spread to the vinyl siding, went right up the vinyl siding into the attic space, and it was OVER. By the time they arrived, it was beyond their capabilities. This is Ponciana Avenue in Cleveland. This is 1.1 miles from my house. The occupant was home. The industry has told us barbecue fires do not start house fires. We don't have the documentation to show that. And yet, this is a house fire that was started by a barbecue. The occupant had pushed it against a wall. The grill was still hot. The occupant went inside the house. All of a sudden, she noticed that the back of the house was on fire. There was not a delayed response. The occupant ran outside the front door, across the street, and banged on the door of Engine 43. Engine 43 pulled out of the barn, pulled up, and the house was torn down 6 months later. This is a house on Golden Avenue. This is one of the last house fires I had as an incident commander in Cleveland, in a very low-income neighborhood. And when we pulled up, the back of the house was rolling, it was blowing out the back two windows, and our crews responded and knocked it down. And two lessons here. One is that a young kid was charging his laptop with a knockoff charger. So if you think about the presentations yesterday from Adam and from Ben talking about proper charging devices for your lithium-ion battery components or products, it's critically important because this kid bought the charger down at the dollar store and then plugged in his laptop. So I was talking to the father and I said, he goes, yeah, I'm 82. I've been living here for 60 years. And you could tell he was the center of that community because he had a nice big garage. It was a social area. All the neighbors were coming over. And I said, well, what happened? He said, my 16-year-old son. I said, well, I thought you said you were 82. And he goes, damn right, and he high-fived me. And we had a good moment there. But I said, well, insurance will take care of this. And he said, insurance? You think I can get insurance in this neighborhood? I can't get insurance. He goes, I can't fix this house. I'm going to have to move. I'm going to have to go live with my son. So that neighborhood lost their anchor. And the only reason this fire did not propagate to the house next door is because the house next door was already gone, right? So that's how quickly that fire propagated up and down that house. So these fires do have consequences, and we do need to be cognizant of it, because as Kelly's going to get into, it's, when we start to retrofit, we're not only looking at retrofitting that house, we have to look at the impact at surrounding structures. And this is a house that's in Brunswick, Ohio, or apartment building in Brunswick, Ohio. And this is about 15 miles outside of Cleveland. And this fire started on the exterior, went up the side of the structure. Mother and father got out of the apartment, but apparently forgot their 2-year-old inside the apartment. The 2-year-old did not make it. When the assistant chief arrived on scene, he was interviewed by the media, and he made a comment. He goes, the fire raced up the side of the building like it was on gasoline. The next day, he got a phone call from an industry rep that just said, Chief, you should watch what you say in the media. It could get you sued. They never asked how the family was doing. They never asked how his firefighters were doing. They never asked how the community was doing. They were worried about a comment made about their product. So these are the challenges that we have sometimes. And then we went into the code world. This is Kyle Wilson. And this was another exterior fire. This was a wind-driven fire. It propagated up the side of the structure into the attic space. It was about 6 in the morning when they arrived. They did not know that the family had fled out the back door and went over to the neighbor's house. They initiated search and rescue. Kyle Wilson was up in the master bedroom when the fire that was building up in the attic literally exploded down into the living space. It went from about 100 degrees to 1,200 degrees in a matter of seconds. Unfortunately, he was unable to escape. When we were at a code hearing, we were talking about putting fire breaks at that barrier, at that eave. And someone from industry, and he did not mean it disrespectfully, he said, listen, we're talking about property loss here. I had to go to the microphone. I go, Kyle Wilson was not a piece of property. These fires have bigger impacts than a piece of lost property because our members are operating inside these structures looking for the occupants that may be trapped, right? So it behooves us to be involved in the process. It benefits us to be involved in the research so we can bring solutions to the marketplace because this is a real concern. I don't want to say a concern, but they are dual goals, right? We understand the impact of climate change on our environment. We understand it's happening. We understand the growth of the wildfires and the size and the strengths of the hurricanes. So there are legitimate efforts to increase sustainability. There are legitimate efforts to make buildings better performing buildings. But we can't be solely focused on accomplishing that goal without keeping in mind that we have to meet fire safety performance as well. And as Kelly will show in her coverage of our testing, they don't have to be exclusive. You can accomplish both, right? It's on your approach and it's educating each other. And this goes back to a project we did at FSRI. I didn't mention it. I've been a member of the advisory board for FSRI since we were founded. And it's been great. It's been great to be involved in this research. And what we were doing is we were looking at exterior fires propagating up into the attic, looking at the fire that killed Kyle Wilson, looking at the fire that's injured other firefighters. And we had a technical panel of firefighters and talking to them about what their risks are, what their concerns are, what their operational challenges are. So we looked at different setups. We looked at different designs on the exterior, from having OSB or plywood with just a vinyl siding on it, to having stucco, to having 1-inch polystyrene, rigid polystyrene on the exterior, to having it going into the attic with spray foam insulation. And I could tell you, with the rigid polystyrene on the exterior and a simple Bunsen burner, 100 kilowatt fire, not much, small waste can, I'll show you an example here in a second, we realized fire up into the attic space in 1 minute and 52 seconds. You're just getting out of the barn in 1 minute and 52 seconds. And the important thing out of this project that we have to learn, we have to take forward, is that it's great to have that attic fire, and we all do it. We get that moth to the flame, right? Get through the door, get up the stairs, start getting water on that attic. We also have to be cognizant of that exterior fire that's pushing it. And we've lost firefighters. Recently, we lost firefighters in Tennessee because they did not address the exterior fire that was driving the interior fire down on them. So what we're looking at here with this project and here are buildings that are not subjected to NFPA 285 testing. And if you look right here, just in the scope of NFPA 285, you see that type 1, 2, 3, or 4. You don't see type 5 involved. And if you start going through the whole flow chart, too bad Adam's not here because flow charts make his day. But you can see buildings over 40 feet, NFPA 285 requirement. But residential, type 5, 3 stories, are not subjected to NFPA 285. So if companies or building owners want to go there and retrofit their building to make it more energy efficient, they don't have to do any fire testing to evaluate the performance of that exterior system. And so what kind of drove this after that 2014 project. There were some in the industry that wanted to change that. So they were really trying to take the test and also accompany it with ASTM 2707 and write a test standard right there in the code world, which is not a very good or pretty process, and it usually is not a very successful process. But it really started things going. There's a picture from an ICC meeting. I think that day they were giving away free beer, because usually you don't have that many people in the room. But really what this brought up is the need to start to address this from a test standard development. What is the ASTM 2707? Well, it's a wall penetration test. And I don't think, Wayne, you talked about it at all. But really, it's evaluating the fire penetrating through that exterior wall. So we were saying, can we take this and modify it? Can we put it into a fire propagation test? And there was an industry that came to UL and started to do some research. Could they develop this? They have a non-combustible product. It's also an insulation product that can go on the exterior walls. And they wanted to see if we could develop a test standard that would be applicable to those residential walls. So this was going right into COVID, but they were looking from taking the penetration test to the propagation test. It's a 4 by 16 foot wall. And as you can see through here, I'll show you, there were a lot of considerations. How size should the wall sample be? What should be the flame exposure? Should it be 50 kilowatts, 75 kilowatts, 100, 150? What should it be? How long should the application of the flame be on that wall sample? Do you have an observation period? Do you turn off the flame and then observe for a period of time? Should there be a pass-fail criteria? Where should the thermocouples go? So there were a lot of questions going into it. And unfortunately, we didn't come out of that project with any definitive answers, but it gave us a lot of information for going forward. And just as a sample, I want to show you what the size of that flame looks like. So from left to right, you have 30 kilowatts of exposure, 40, 100, 160, and 300. So that really is just the amount of energy that you're applying to that exterior wall, and then you're measuring what the impact of that exposure would be. This is the chart. We're going to be able to make this available for you. I'm not going to go through the whole chart, but you can start to see the different setups that were being evaluated, the impact of the different flame applications. Now, an argument can be said, oh, it's subjected to 300 kilowatts every time. That's like a plastic garbage can, a large plastic garbage can catching on fire. But you have to find that balance. You have to find that balance where industry can be successful, and our realization of what that risk benefit or risk value should be, how often is it going to occur, and the consequence of that failure. Because we're not going to be building everything like Flintstones. And we have to recognize that. And what we have to do, I think it's been said a couple times today, is as you're in that engagement, and Dave mentioned it, where is that balance that we can meet industry at, that we can evaluate that performance and ensure that performance provides safety to the occupant and to our members. So that kind of leads us into what Kelly's going to present on and how DOE approached us. They had invested a significant amount of money with Pacific Northwest Laboratories looking at designing exterior energy performing wall systems with the intent of post-construction installation. So modifying 1 and 2 family homes, but also multifamily homes. And what they were having problems with is having these designs accepted because fire. And we actually sat as a group and said, oh, that'll burn, that'll burn, that'll burn, that'll be okay, that'll burn. But really, as Kelly goes through this project, what we're trying to do is not evaluate each individual system and their performance, but is there a pathway forward? Is there a pathway forward where you can meet multiple design criteria, but basically your performance is what we're measuring you on. So with that, I'm going to kind of turn it over to Kelly. Do we want to get up and take just 3 minutes? I know we want to go ahead and take 5 minutes, and then we'll come back because we have a break scheduled now, but instead of 15, we'll keep it to 5. How's that? Okay. It's a hard punch here, so we're gonna keep pushing forward. Yeah, I just turned it on. So, now that I'm behind the podium, Aaron's not telling me to slim down. Slim down. Stay in the light. Stay in the light, Carol Ann. So no, we've talked a lot in the last 2 days about our partnerships and about the importance of research and, you know, the Department of Energy providing the faith in us to do this work. And it was really important that we had really good people involved in the work. And I think it's also important that we get this information out to our membership. And all of this is being recorded. We are going to create educational programs on the webpage for that. But one of the folks that we really wanted to involve in this project was Kelly Opert. Kelly, her background, she came from NIST. She worked with Dan Madrikowski at NIST, and then she transferred over to UL Solutions as a engineer and also project manager. And she's a lab rat, right? She belongs in the lab. She loves being in the lab, loves doing projects, and she loves fire as much as we do. So it was really important for us to bring Kelly in, and I'm going to turn over the DOE residential project to Kelly Opert.
Thank you, Sean. I will start off by saying that this is an uncorrected slide. I am not a technical director. Dwayne accidentally promoted me. Yeah, Sean did a pretty good job kind of recapping my background. I currently work for Jensen Hughes as a fire protection engineer in the research and development, testing and evaluation group. I realize that's a mouthful. So with that, I will go over the results from the DOE funded project. We did testing on a number of energy efficient wall designs that led the way to revisions and hopefully creation of a new ASTM method. The project goals here, one was to look at flame propagation, up new, this is also a mouthful, new cost-effective, energy-efficient residential retrofit wall assemblies. And we'll get into a little bit more of how that plays into the testing method development. The other part of this is to collect data to revise the draft test method that ASTM had started as a result of FSRI's attic fire testing. Lastly, we wanted to dig into which of these features and these wall assemblies could potentially be hazardous, and what does it mean for the fire service. So, to give a little bit of background, PNNL, Pacific National Labs, I'm missing one of the letters there, did a 3-year study specifically looking at how to make older homes more energy efficient. So as part of that, they went through and they looked at current practices, emerging practices, new technologies. They did a very in-depth study. It's a good read. As Sean said, the exception is they didn't factor in the fire performance. So when we talk about the baseline wall and where that came from, it came from this PNNL study. And the construction here, we had SPF boards, empty cavity, just gypsum wall board, some cedar siding, because that's what's representative of homes pre-energy codes. So looking at the work that PNNL had done, we went through the different wall assemblies that they had tested to kind of choose which ones we wanted to look at in more depth from a fire perspective. So the designation on the side The A, the D, the E, the L, the O, that's their reference system in that report. The ones that we ended up selecting, we factored into a few different considerations. We ruled out one, combinations of materials that had been kind of looked at during the attic fire test. We ruled out things that weren't on the market yet, or things that P&L knew weren't going to be feasible anytime in the near future from an adoptability standpoint. So this is what we ended up having left over. Something that they had mentioned to us that they didn't factor into their considerations is the siding material, because a lot of the energy efficient properties of a wall assembly have more to do with the layering than it does the exterior. However, in terms of fire propagation, that's something we want to look at. So you'll see 3 different types of cladding. We used wood composite, vinyl, and fiber cement. So we conducted 11 tests, 10 different wall assemblies. All of them used this base wall. And this base wall is entirely pulled from the P&L base wall in that report. So some of the comments that we've got in the past is, this doesn't represent construction, current day construction. No, it was never intended to. So the base wall here that we applied the layers of the different wall assemblies, we had the spruce pine boards, the single layer of gypsum board on the inside, and we attached an A-frame to the side so that we could move around the wall samples for testing. This is just a picture of one of the samples to kind of give you an idea of what it looks like. The burner that we used during this testing is similar to the same as the one in the attic fire testing. It was also used in 2707. So it's a simple line burner, propane fed. The burner is placed up against the wall assembly, but a gap was left between the wall assembly and the burner so that the sample would not be ignited by the hot metal. So the first test we did, we were looking at, we tried to pick something we thought would be middle of the road in terms of fire performance. We want to hone in a little more on the ignition fire size. So based on the earlier UL research, they had determined, they looked at several different fire sizes, determined that 75 kilowatts they thought was best, but they hadn't gone lower than that. And ultimately, when we take this into consideration for test method development, what we're looking for is an ignition source and a test method that allows us to differentiate performance between different sets of samples. So we didn't want a ignition fire that was so aggressive it burned up every single wall assembly, but we don't want something so easy that every single wall assembly would pass this method. So based on the earlier research, settled on the 75 kilowatts. We did one test with wood composite siding against the asphalt paper, and then a second one with a 50 kilowatt ignition source. So after the course of about 20 minutes, we saw the slow progression up to the top of the wall sample. So in terms of what we're looking at for metrics as part of the new standard test method is time to the top, time to the sides of the samples. And this was a pretty good result. We're pretty happy with this. The second one, after 20 minutes of exposure, we we got not quite halfway up the wall, so it didn't quite have enough oomph to show us what we needed to see from that sample. So for the remainder of the testing that I'm going to show you, we used the 75 kilowatt ignition fire. So I mentioned before the different cladding types. So the first couple tests here, we did the wood composite, we did vinyl, and we did the fiber cement board. So at 4 minutes, we'll get into the video, for vinyl siding over asphalt paper, that's how long it took to reach the top of the sample. This video clip is 2 minutes into it. Kind of give you a sense of what we're seeing. The vinyl in this case is kind of melting away, is kind of falling off to the side, exposing the asphalt paper underneath. We see attachment to the asphalt paper, and relatively quickly the fire spreading up the sample. So moving on to the fiber cement board, siding, excuse me. We had left the 75 kilowatt fire next to the sample for 20 minutes, and this is what the result was. So there's a little bit of staining, but otherwise no cracking, no penetration of the fire behind the siding or attachment to the wall. So moving on, we did the same 3 cladding again with expanded polystyrene behind the cladding. There are 2 layers of 2.5-inch EPS panels. This particular panel also had openings through the insulation for like installing cables, and that becomes important a little later. So behind that then was a layer of mineral wool. So over the course, we got about 80 minutes in before it reaches the top of the sample, and we've gotten what we needed out of the sample. Repeating it again with the vinyl siding, we see it quickly races up the top. 4.5 minutes, we've burned away most of the sample. Fiber cement siding. This test was an interesting case because, like previously, 20 minutes of exposure, there's no flame attachment, it doesn't break through the siding, we get a little bit of staining, no big deal. For our own purposes, to see what would happen if there was a penetration, we did something a little extreme. It's admittedly extreme, but we removed a few of the panels. Let's see, is that gonna, there we go. To see what would happen if there's direct flame exposure to the foam, whether it would attach. I'll let this run for a little bit. So we start to see the flame attached to what's left of the foam in the wall assembly. And it starts eating out the cavities in the wall. As time goes on, we reach the top of the wall assembly solely from the interior of that wall assembly. So right now that fire is gutting the interior. And when I show you this sample, I want you to keep in mind too that it was assembled by a group of people that prepare test samples. So, you know, it's meticulously assembled, you know, the siding, you know, properly layered and installed as it's supposed to be. So, you know, something to keep in mind here is, you know, we can have this excellent shell protector for a wall assembly, but, you know, something as stupid as cutting a hole out for an electrical outlet might be enough for a fire to penetrate that protective shell and eat out the interior. So because of the way that this was put on top of, it was supposed to be simulating putting it on top of, you know, an existing older home, there's no barriers, no vertical barriers in that exterior application to prevent that flame spread from then going from the fire source directly into the attic space. So the next thing we want to look at, we switched over to extruded polystyrene. In this case, we had a layer of the XPS on top of the SPF board, and then the furring strips were holding the installation in place, and it had the extruded polystyrene infill between the furring strips. So again, we ignite the fire, let it go, 4 minutes, it's raised up to the top of the sample. In this one, we wanted to take a look at the foil-faced polyiso foam board. In this case, there was no infill between the furring strips. So what we saw is once the fire is ignited, it quickly kind of moved up this channel that's created by the furring strips. In this case, we had the vinyl siding, kind of see it fold away on the sides there. And you know, 2-3 minutes in, that one was done. So in the second test here, same deal. This time we used the wood composite instead of the vinyl siding. This one lasted a little longer, made it to about 10 minutes. Something that was kind of interesting here is before the flame actually reached the top of the assembly, we were seeing some ignition of the gases above the assembly as you know, all the volatiles in the cavity were starting to release. So the gases, the combustion gases, as the lower part of the wall was burning, was moving through the cavity up to the top of the wall. Sorry to double click there. Okay, so the last test, test 11, we wanted to try the vinyl siding again. This time over top, furring strips and mineral wool. So after this 20-minute exposure, we did not get any flame attachment. And it was just some light staining. Here we go. So this is kind of a comparison of you know, 2 tests with vinyl siding as the exterior. The one on the left has the siding over the furring strips in the middle rule, and the other one is the first vinyl siding test we did over the asphalt paper, just so you can kind of get a visual of the difference in performance here. And what this really shows us is that the performance of that exterior siding alone isn't the only determining factor of the fire performance. So this is just a high-level summary of the test that we did. The red kind of indicates how far the fire made it into the wall assembly. The first several kind of stopped at the spruce pine boards. 4 was the cement fiber board where we didn't see attachment. Next couple stopped at the mineral wool layer, and kind of continues down. One thing I want to cover, just going through this test series, is the heat release rate of these samples. So this plot actually gives you a comparison of what the highest burning material versus the lowest burning material. So the fiber cement over asphalt paper, we were hovering at about 100 kilowatts as the peak heat release rate. The vinyl over the expanded polystyrene and the mineral wool, that peaked at about 6 megawatts. So 6,000 kilowatts versus 100 kilowatts. That's the difference in performance here. And if that doesn't really click, 6 megawatts is basically 2 big fluffy sofas fully involved in burning. Something we also looked at is the heat flux from these test samples. So we put some heat flux gauges, kind of map out the exposure from each of these wall samples. And what information that gives us is the likelihood of ignition of nearby surfaces. So the closest heat flux gauge was centered, it was 8 feet from the sample. This one I picked out because this was the highest, that 6 megawatt test, just to kind of give you a sense of what it can do. The vinyl expanded polystyrene over the mineral wool, we got a peak heat flux of a little under 25 kilowatts per meter squared. For context, I pulled this little chart from NIST. The exposure that you get from the sun on any given day is about 1 kilowatt per meter squared. We start to get uncomfortable at about 3 to 5, and 20 is generally accepted about as the onset of flashover. So, at 8 feet away from this wall samples, it's feasible that it could be igniting that surface. And that surface might be another structure, it might be a garage, it might be a car, it could be a handful of things. So a quick summary of the findings of the research. Both the external siding and the interior wall materials, they can impact the wall performance. And that's kind of why this new test method is so important. So, the performance of any one material can be jeopardized by other nearby materials. In this particular series, we saw the vinyl siding kind of fall away from the wall sample as it was heated. What that means is then you have an interior layer that's not intended to be exposed is now exposed. Thirdly, non-combustible siding, it can provide a protective shell. But as we saw in the video earlier, it doesn't, weaknesses in how the siding is attached, if it's not attached correctly, if it's, someone knocks a piece off, you cut into that wall material, that protective shell, now you're exposing, potentially a weaker material underneath. When the number 4 here, we're also seeing this idea of continuous insulation on residential structures. Typically you would see that done in the commercial high-rises and things like that. That's the difference here is that has to go through the NFPA 285 tests, where in the residential sphere that doesn't have to happen. But the problem with the continuous insulation is then you lose the compartmentation that exists in wall cavities. So your gypsum wallboard, your OSB, your breaks in the stud, all of those things that would compartmentalize insulation aren't there. And that's the potential for a fire moving quite easily up into an attic space. Some of the features that we saw in the technologies from the P&L report also incorporated features to allow more airflow in the wall assembly. That's great for reducing the mold, the mildew, the humidity. The downside of that, and something that has to be factored in here, is that's also what provides oxygen to fires. So we might be trading one benefit for another. The next point I wanted to cover is the heat flux, measured from 8 feet from the wall. Just to reiterate again, this is potential for structure to structure spread. And lastly, that kind of rolls into the importance of having the ASTM, the new ASTM method, to screen some of these potential products out from the market. With that, I'll pass it over to Dwayne.
Thank you very much, Kelly. You can stay up here, and then pretty soon I think we'll just roll right into the panel discussion, right? But I did want to share that so real time, we had an opportunity to get this information and this work in front of the ASTM group, and it really informed us on many of the questions that the group had before moving forward with this draft standard. And as you can see here, we landed on a class of performance. So at the 16-foot level, as Kelly was showing, we had a lot of different performances. And really key for this group is that many of these products, they were actually reaching the top of the 16-foot structure in less than 5 minutes. And as Sean said, you're not even really on, you're still on your way to the event at that time. So we looked at it and we said if it's between 5 and 10 minutes, it would get a Class C. If it's between 10 to 20 minutes to the top of the structure, it would be a Class B. And then if it does survive and gets to the top after 20 minutes, then it would be a Class A performing type of product. So the group did not want to have just a straight pass or fail, but they wanted to have different classes of performance. And that's kind of where this group is headed. We stayed with the 20-minute test duration. As Kelly mentioned, we showed through our data that we wanted to stay with the 75 kilowatt ignition source, no soffit, triplicate testing. We're keeping the lateral flame spread in there, so we don't want it to spread laterally. We're not going to have an observation period. And so these are some of the criteria that went into the ballot items. So when they asked for someone to lead this task, everybody else took 2 steps backwards, and I was standing there. So I'm the leader of this task group, and so I'm kind of taking some of the heat, if you will, for some of the negatives. At ASTM, it's a big voting pool. It's well over 100 people that vote on these standards. So unlike NFPA that has maybe a slightly lesser group that form their technical committees, ASTM has well over 100 people voting on the standard. So we did pull some negatives. And the first time I had the negatives, it was well over 20 negatives, so we had a lot to deal with. We made some changes for consistency of the word exterior wall. We made many changes. Kelly did a total rewrite of Section 7 that talked about the base wall, so thank you for that, Kelly. We redrew the figures. We made special notes about flammability to the sides of the wall and termination of the test period. They didn't like just A, B, C because it confuses with other class A, B, and C that exist in the flame protection, fire protection world. So we called it EW for exterior wall A, B, and C. And we made other small changes to the commentary section as well. So I went out for a reballot. And the reballot, we still pull some negatives, but now we're actually into helpful negatives that are helping us to hone this standard. And our next meeting will be in June in Philadelphia. And so we're hoping to make even more progress on the standard in June. So yeah, just kind of showing you how this works, where we had the idea at ASTM, we actually did the work with DOE, it informed us. Now we're back to the ASTM group trying to hone that standard and make improvements, but it is moving forward. So I just wanted to share that with the group here. So we had a chance to talk about the comprehensive fire protection approach and the challenges on exterior walls for commercial. Shared with you some improvements and reform that actually happened because of the Grenfell Tower and many of those other large-scale commercial fires. And I also showed you how to look at product IQ to find where some of those certified systems are. And then Sean took us through the residential building work and the DOE work and how these fires really are happening out there in real world. And then Kelly did a great job of taking you through the DOE project and the work that we did, the 11 tests that we did, and taking us into the development of this new standard. So thank you for allowing us to share that with you. And I think with that, Sean, we're going to roll right into some panel discussion, right? Okay. Okay, good. All right. Okay.
We're in the home stretch, folks. If you need cookies, there's still a few cookies over there.
Take a 5-minute break for cookies.
Yes. That's how I bribe Chief Healy up here. So again, I don't want it to be strictly from me. There was a lot of information, especially technical information, that was presented in that last session, mine aside. But we have Kelly is on the panel with us. We have Dwayne, and we brought a newcomer, Chief George Healy from the FDNY. George, would you like to introduce yourself to the group?
Yeah, as Sean mentioned, I'm in the FDNY for 33 years. A big part of my background and my experience is early on with Sean getting involved with the testing with NIST at the time, back in 2006, and now with UL. And I am on the UL FSRI advisory board and have been very fortunate to be involved in some of these events that UL over the years has done, and now the IAFF to have this open forum and these discussions.
No, I really appreciate you being here because you've been involved with the FSRI research from the beginning, and we've been very fortunate that FSRI has opened the ability to be involved in incidents nationally but internationally. And Dwayne referenced the incident in Grenfell Tower over in London. You were actually contacted as a subject matter expert, and you and Captain John Cirillo traveled over to London to visit the UK and the Grenfell site specifically. You want to just talk about that visit and what you saw?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very unique opportunity for us, kind of what sparked my department's interest in this was that, and Dwayne did a very good job at documenting the fact that this isn't, you know, a lone incident. There have been, you know, multitudes of these exterior wall assembly fires. Of course, you know, Grenfell was the most dramatic and most significant, you know, specifically due to the loss of life. And my organization, in very short order, after asking our Department of Buildings, were there buildings similar in nature in New York, we were quite astounded to find out that the answer was yes. We had high rises in New York that had similar types of materials, and that begged the question, could it happen in New York? And I think the reasonable answer was, well, if it could happen around the globe, why couldn't it happen in New York? So my department's leadership felt that if we could go over to Grenfell because of our background with the testing and maybe have some interaction with the brigade in London, learn a little bit more about that event and how they coped with it, maybe we would have some better insight and the ability tactically to deal with it. But then also, as Dwayne mentioned, we did kind of drive some of the local laws within New York City to try to make those structures safer, the high-rise structures that they contain these materials. And it was very enlightening to see. And really, the Grenfell fire, one of the things I walked away with was, it was, from a fire service perspective, it was a semi-ordinary fire in a flat. I believe they feel that it started in a refrigerator in the kitchen, migrated through into a bedroom, failed windows, and the fire brigade very quickly and efficiently extinguished the fire in the interior of that structure. But as they were, you know, recognizing the fact that the fire was controlled on the interior of the building, it became apparent that the fire was beginning to take hold on the exterior. A little bit different with their availability of exterior streams and, you know, aerial apparatus. But that being said, and I think Dwayne mentioned in one of his other case studies or examples, I think it was something like 23 minutes, and they had fire up and over the roof at that structure. And a little bit different than maybe some of the construction in New York and in the States. All right, single stairwell, which, you know, I'm sure further complicated their ability
I'll bring that up in a minute.
to extinguish and search and remove. But the built environment, it's great that we're here with the people that are conducting the testing. It's more important, I think, to get the code officials, and we've been talking a lot about that this week, getting involved in those the NFPA processes and other processes to make sure that we have a voice, that we can you know, level our concerns, not only for our own membership, but the people who we're sworn to protect.
Yeah, no, you bring up single stairwell and a single staircase. Right now, again, the importance of us being involved. There's been an effort in 11 states, one state has already passed it, where affordable housing advocates are advancing proposals through the legislature. They tried it through the building code process just recently and were defeated heavily. But in the name of cheaper housing, they want to narrow down the requirement for 2 stairways or 2 ways out of a building. In residential buildings, 6 stories and less. Our current codes require, if you go above 3 stories, you're required to have 2 means of egress. And we saw the challenges in Grenfell, the stairwells being packed. You try to use it as an egress stairwell for occupants, but you're also trying to use it as an attack stairwell. We've seen the example in the LaSalle fire in Chicago, where folks were trapped in the attack stairwell above the attack point. You know, if we are not involved before we turn around and know it, we're going to have these buildings in our jurisdictions. And so we have to be cognizant of that. And so, Dwayne, earlier while you were presenting, Chief Healy, out of turn, asked a question. And yeah, I had to get that in. He asked you, what was better, the BS 8414 test or the NFPA 285 test? And we've both been over there. We've both been in multiple locations and have seen that argument. Just real quickly, because I know it can be a 30-minute presentation, the differences between the two tests, and maybe, I'll do the follow-up question now, we haven't seen in the U.S. the fires we've seen internationally, and maybe that's a combination of the performance of the requirements in 285, but the importance of the inspection to make sure that that system is the one that's installed.
Absolutely.
Didn't you mean Chief Healy had a very good question?
Oh, Chief Ely had an outstanding question. It was just out of turn.
Right. Yeah, I really do appreciate that, and I do appreciate the question, Chief Healy. Basically, we do get the question many times to compare the fire response test, like NFPA 285, compared to BS 8414, compared to the ISO version of the test. There's a version for Australia, and again, as I mentioned, all of them are slightly different, such that you cannot necessarily run one test and allow that to be representative of the other test. In Canada, there's another test. It's called CAN ULC CAN S134. So all of these tests have their pros and cons. For example, the BS 8414 test, Chief Healy looked at it and saw that the energy source looked like it was higher than NFPA 285. But there's also details about the test, such as there's a cement wall or concrete wall that you actually build against. So the fire is actually not impinging on the interior of the whole wall assembly. You're not necessarily examining the window flashing in that particular test, and there are some questions about how well you are actually looking at the pass-fail criteria relative to internal insulation type of products. So NFPA 285 has those specifics in there and has certain pass-fail criteria about it. So some of that pass-fail criteria actually causes it to be more strict than maybe some of the other methods. When I get asked the question, well, which one is worse? Like I said, there are pros and cons on a lot of those different tests, and so where you might see one as more strict in one area is less strict in another area. BS 8414 has what they call a wing wall. It's an L-shaped wall, whereas NFPA 285 does not have that wing wall. CAN S134 is a 3-story building relative to a 2-story building. So all of them have their distinct differences, and I've actually written some papers that go through a little bit of what those differences are. I would say more so than the test standard itself, to the question of, well, why haven't we seen that here in the U.S.? We have very specific guidance in the U.S. codes that do get picked up by jurisdictions on the application of NFPA 285. It's required in there. It's been in the standards for a really long time. And I would say that strict application of the code requirements and the ability of the code officials to actually be in a position to enforce that is a big difference for what we see here in the U.S. versus what we saw in London.
And you mentioned the test between the 285, the one that passed, the one that failed. I didn't catch if you mentioned why it failed. That was the same test system, except they made one modification, and that one modification led to failure, and that's the importance of
Absolutely.
Making sure that the wall that's being tested is the one that's being installed.
Correct. Yeah. So after Chief Healy's work, and we actually saw some things coming out of the reform in the UK. One of the things that they talked about is called the thread of truth, making sure that the product that actually gets tested is actually the same product and the assembly of products that actually gets installed on the building. And if you read the Grenfell inquiry, there's a lot there that causes doubt, questions as to, well, the assemblies that actually got tested, were they the same is actually what got installed. And so that thread of truth is really, really important.
And having witnessed these tests in different locations in Australia, having the test be able to be indoors and a controlled aspect of an indoor test is very important. We were witnessing a test in Australia where Australia's a modified 8414, and they were doing it outdoors. And there are certain environmental conditions. It has to be less than 2 meters per second wind speed or 2 meters per minute wind speed. It can't be raining. And sure enough, it was raining that day, and it was a windy day, and we stood around and waited, and it stopped raining, and about 5 minutes later, they lit it. And I turned to the one engineer and I said, well, what if it starts raining again? He said, it's already lit. And then the wind kicked in again, and the wind was hitting the wall, and it was pulling the flame away from the wall for the duration of the test. And Also with the 8414, it's a wood crib, so it's not a consistent application of the energy. And we could see that they were going to pass this test because the environmental effects had a dramatic impact. And yet that probably won't be reported in the test report. Yeah, so Kelly, now that you're ostracized on your little island over there all by yourself, you talked about, you went through all the wall test. And at first when we came out of that, we were really discussing a pass-fail criteria. But after discussion with industry, you started to see Class A, B, C. Can you kind of walk through what the reasoning of that was? And
Sure. So in terms of evaluating the wall assembly, there's kind of two paths you can go. You can go with a pass-fail kind of criteria or this classification type criteria. The difference between the two, the pass-fail criteria, the testing lab that runs the test applies the criteria. You either pass or you fail, and that's how it's determined. And that's kind of the end of the story. So the flip side, the classification system, the test lab, based on the results, in this case, you're looking at fire spread up the wall to the sides of the wall. That timing, the duration of spread gets factored into the classification. So it differentiates the performance, not much flame spread, a lot of flame spread, quickly up the wall flame spread. But the intent of the classification system is to enable an AHJ then to kind of have a sense of what the test results were and make their own judgment calls. So, the best rating, I know we started with ABC and I think it's EWABC because there's too many ABC ratings. So lost that train of thought. So it enables them to quickly look at the rating system and know, this is how quickly the flame spread went up the wall. And, for some cases, they might want a high performing product. In other cases, maybe there's a combination of factors to consider where, B or C is acceptable. But ultimately, it gives more flexibility in the application.
sure.
Yes, so, and some of the conversation was around that many of the tests that we see in codes, there's a selection process for ASTM E119, UL 263. You can have a 1 hour resistance rating, or in some cases, in some applications, it might be 2 hours or 3 hours, and it's all based upon the application in the code. When we talk about the Steiner tunnel, where you look at flame spread and smoke developed on interior finished products, that's a class A, B, and C. And there's different levels of what the class A, B, and C mean relative to the flame spread or the smoke that you can accept for different applications within that building. And so the discussion at ASTM was that they wanted something real similar. Instead of just a yes or no, does it get to the top of the wall, 16 feet, yes or no, and then say pass or fail, they wanted to be able to have these different classes of performance so that the code developers can get into a room and have another development cycle and discuss whether they want class A, B, or C for specific applications. Maybe urban wildland interface might be one class, whereas if it's not a wildland urban interface location, they may choose a different class structure. And so they wanted the versatility to be able to select the class rating.
Right. One of the things I want to point out, Kelly, that you pointed out as well, is I don't think this training and education and information is just specific for the fire service. I mean, as AHJs go to evaluate what they want to allow in their community, you mentioned wildland urban interface, but urban density is just as critical to make sure that we don't allow fire propagation on the exterior of the building that could propagate over to another structure. I mean, do I remember correctly, Kel, that when we did the original wall test in 2014, when we put an eve on that sample, as it started going up, it started hitting that vertical obstacle. Did the radiant energy start going horizontally and providing some type of risk to that exposure?
So part of the heat flux exposure is kind of, physically where the fire is relative to, the surface that might ignite. In the case of, the test with the eave, the fire is allowed to move up the wall assembly attached to the eave and kind of roll around it. Well, now instead of having, the fire exposure on the wall itself, it's now 2 foot further out, and you end up with a fire exposure that's much closer to potentially the surrounding building or structure.
George, I know you come from a big city. Boston's a big city, have high-rise fires, but many of our members, the majority of our members, I think, don't work in that environment, or they have 1 or 2 high-rises in their community. Can you just talk about some of the challenges that the fire service faces when we attack a fire vertically in a high-rise?
I think the main thing is that vertical response time, right? I mean, we might be on scene in that 3 to 5 minute window, but then how long does it take us to get to those upper floors? And one of the things we kind of routinely see in high-rise fires, at some point, typically in that operation, you will lose usage. You will lose the usage of the elevators. They'll be compromised by water infiltration, or maybe we happen to overload them, or something of that nature. So we have that vertical response time. And my organization, of course, is very robust, but a lot of organizations run with very small crew strength, and to have the ability to put an adequate firefighting force vertically up in this building in a timely manner to confront these challenges is extremely significant, especially for a smaller organization.
And not only can you look at that, if you recall, the IFF did a research project with NIST looking at crew sizes impact on response at mid-rise and high-rise, and that's still available on our website.
And one other very significant thing, because a lot of departments don't have the breadth of experience in those types of structures, it's kind of we plug and play what's worked in the past. So sometimes they implement tactics that have been very successful in other types of structures and try to utilize those very same tactics in buildings that might not be appropriate.
Yeah, excellent point. Do we have any questions from the group? If you ask a question, you get a cookie. And you get to see Flam move. So I know it's been a long day, long 2 days. We really appreciate everyone being here. I want to kind of go to the panel at least one more time here and kind of go, Kelly, what are your thoughts moving forward? What's the future here, especially with the testing in the residential area? Where are our gaps?
I would say at the completion of the last series of research tests, we kind of went through this combination of materials called out by PNNL. We developed a test method, a way to evaluate the assembly, but something that we didn't really dig into was how these different features impact the fire performance of the wall assembly. So is there some amount of breathability in the structure that we're actually okay with? How much is too much? How much does the furring strip separation for attachment to the insulation matter? What happens if we put similar to a wall cavity, breaks between furring strips? All of those factors are sort of left as unknown. We know a combination is good or bad, but the how influential each of those variables is, I think we still need to study.
Thank you. It's not just about fighting a fire. It's also how we can be active in our community and our regulations within our community to limit that spread of fire, to limit that fire growth. We can only do that if we're educated on what we know through the research on how quickly the fire propagates and what the strategies are to minimize that. Dwayne, you did that just to make him walk, didn't you? Yeah, he did. Well, when Dwayne says hop, man, Tom Flam jumps.
Yes, I think one of the things that that we do get asked quite a bit is there some type of characterization, material characterization, where we can look at a composite and be able to predict the the results of a test like this NFPA 285 test. You might remember I showed the one slide that talked about the scale of tests, where you have material level, and then composite testing, then intermediate tests, and then it should ramp up and be representative of full-scale tests. I think it would be great if we could get in the lab and do more testing to have more confidence in some of our small-scale testing and how that small-scale testing can be predictive of what you're going to see in the fuller-scale tests. I know Kelly and I had a conversation about getting in the lab and maybe doing more tests. There's a apparatus called the cone calorimeter. It gives you information about ignition time, the peak heat release, the total heat release, and can you use some of that type of data to inform you on how something is going to perform to a test like the one that we're doing with the ASTM method. So I think if we had the ability to go in the lab and do more work related to this effort, it would be in the characterization arena.
Did you hear that, DOE? We need more lab time. We need more funding. George, from a fire service perspective, what do you see that we need to do in the future to really understand the risk of these exterior fires?
Well, I think, and one thing I was going to comment on is I think it's very admirable that the International is putting an emphasis on this, of bringing the players into the room and having the conversations. I know I've had great discussions, sidebars with a lot of the people in the room, and that was an interesting point, and that's something we can look into. And so being together and having these conversations, that built environment is constantly changing. Certainly, the emerging challenges of energy storage are I find it hard to say even new anymore, because it has been present. Many of us have seen it and dealt with it. We heard firsthand just how potentially dangerous it can be. Not to say that that technology is not of value, but there is a potential that there will be an event, and when that event occurs, we need to have that knowledge base. So, everything that's going on here, talking about things like energy storage systems, talking about things like tall wood structures, which we've done in the past, and these, combustible wall assemblies, the fire service is meeting these challenges every day, and sometimes we don't necessarily have the most current or up-to-date knowledge on the threats that any of these technologies pose. So to be able to sit in the room with the people that are, doctors and digging into this stuff, a 30-year career in the fire service is enviable, and Dwayne has been somebody that's been a resource for us for 37 years and continues to be, and continues to have that hunger, and continues to want to be in the room with people like ourselves to hear what we're experiencing, because maybe their thoughts on what the challenge is might not necessarily be the true challenge. So to be together and have those conversations, to talk about our personal protective equipment and how we can better decon it and how we can better design it, and materials that we can use to lessen the potential of significant medical issues for our members down the road is paramount. And I think most cities, even New York, when I came on 33 years ago, it was the high-rise district was Manhattan, and now the high-rise district is the Bronx. It's Queens, it's Brooklyn, it's Staten Island. It's becoming a vertical city, and as you said, Milwaukee put up whatever, a 26-story tall wood structure. We were at a conference a couple of years ago where I think there's a company that's designing a 350-meter tall wood building, which, pardon my math, I only have 10 fingers and 10 toes, but I think that's a 1,000-foot wood structure. And when they laid it out, the reasons why they think it's practical, you know what? Some of those ideas kind of make sense. But when we start having the practical discussion for us, from the fire service perspective, about all limitations. I mean, there's buildings constructed in my city and probably others that if the building systems fail, the fire service does not have a practical way of providing water to the upper levels of those buildings. You know, our apparatus can't do it. So these are the conversations we need to have. We have to make sure the code officials realize our limitations and the fact that we can't overcome every obstacle that the fire ground is potentially presenting us with.
Yeah, no, great. That's a great lead-in to, you know, as we wrap up these 2 days, we appreciate everyone being here. We appreciate those online. We appreciate those that are gonna watch this on the website. We do have another program that's going to be held in Cleveland next year or next month. As Adam pointed out in his presentation, Cleveland is the center of all interest, but it's going to be at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and we're going to live stream it as well. We're going to cover tall timber buildings. We're going to cover high-rise operations. We're going to cover responding to energy hazards, such as underground energy vaults, photovoltaic systems, and residential energy storage systems. And we're going to talk about the PPE because we're in that cycle where it's critical that we're involved in this standard and that our members are informed on it. And we'll also talk a little bit about the OSHA standards that are coming. And also, as it relates to OSHA and the proposed regulations, go to the IFF webpage. It's a extensive document with over 250 proposed regulations, but the fire service has not had the protection that OSHA is now proposing. Every trade that's out there has had this form of protection except the fire service. And this could be one of the most single important efforts undertaken by the federal government to provide protection, safety, and the requirements for proper training, staffing, and equipment for the fire service. So we have a lot of information on that. I want to thank our panelists, George, Dwayne, Kelly, thank you very much. I want to thank our audience, all of our presenters. Brian, I owe you a personal thank you. Thank you to our great folks at E18. Couldn't do it without you, Aaron and Marty, the whole crew, yes. And thank you to General President Ed Kelly and General Secretary Treasurer Frank Lima for their support, because without their support, we wouldn't be here. And I'm really, really proud to work for an organization and two leaders that really emphasize the importance of firefighter health and safety, and not only talk about it, but they walk that walk. And they're constantly pushing us as an organization to push for our members' health and safety. So without further ado, we'll give you a little time back. I think there's a couple of cookies left. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you in Cleveland.